What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here, PackersNews.com, live on Facebook late in the day on Wednesday. The Green Bay Packers have announced their preseason matchups. Don't have hard dates just yet. We have time frames to work off of, but the week slotting and who those opponents will be are now out. You can find that at PackersNews.com. Week 1, the Packers will be facing off against the Titans at home. Week 2 of the preseason, they'll be facing the Steelers and Morgan Burnett, making his return to Lambeau. Then in week 3 of the preseason, they travel out to Oakland to take on the now Jordy Nelson Fighting Raiders. And then week 4, they travel to Kansas City to take on Andy Reid's Chiefs. So it's an all AFC slate. That first swing, the first game against the Titans is slated to happen somewhere between the 9th and the 13th of August. Clearly they'll have solid dates probably in the next week or so. So that's it. That's your preseason slate. Yet again, week 3 has the Packers trekking out to the West Coast. Seems like that happens every single year in the last 3 or 4 years. But that's it. That's who they'll be taking on in the preseason. Obviously, Morgan Burnett and Jordy Nelson both figuring into the preseason schedule is pretty much the only headline there. Week 1 against the Titans, you got to think you'll barely see Marcus Mariota play. I know probably as we get closer to the summer, a lot will be made and asked about Aaron Rodgers and his playing time. He played a little bit more last year in the preseason, but we'll have to wait and see how McCarthy wants to handle that. Hopefully the paint will be good to go this year, yeah, Jonathan? Luckily, they're not playing in the Hall of Fame game, so they should be all right in that regard. Who decides preseason schedules, Steve? The teams work in conjunction with each other and the league. It's a lot different than the actual regular season schedule, which is completely controlled by the league, which will take into account requests from teams, but they essentially set it in conjunction with the teams because of scheduling things like concerts at the some of the stadium venues and stuff, things like that. Austria's watching. What's up, Austria? Watch the Harold Landry highlights. Love his bend rush. Yeah, Dean, I tell you what, if you haven't, make sure you go back and watch his tape from 2016 when he was healthy. Last year he had some highlights, there's no doubt about it, but his full game is on display 2 years ago. Last year he was dealing with an ankle injury and a couple other things. I think the player you're going to be getting in the NFL is much closer to what we saw in 2016. Connor says Rodgers' comments are so overblown. Yes and no. I mean, I know Connor obviously is referring to an interview that Rodgers gave to promote the Mac Fund. I think it was Madison Radio or Milwaukee Radio back on the 9th. And he was asked about the draft and if he would be involved. And he said, something akin to players play, coaches coach, and personnel people make personnel decisions. And it's clear that's how they want it. Now, obviously, ESPN ran with it. Pro Football Talk ran with it. I didn't do a piece on it for Packers News because I thought it was just kind of another in a long line of comments from Rodgers. But I understand why people are taking note. It's not like it's an isolated incident, and I don't think anyone can honestly look at listen to what he's saying there, coupled with what he said at the Super Bowl regarding Alex Van Pelt and a few other comments he's made throughout the years, and not know that he's making a little passive-aggressive shot at the Packers there. And that's fine. He's allowed to do that. He's Aaron Rodgers. He's QB1. But I think anyone who says there's nothing to it is being naive. Florio is a Viking shill. Maybe, Connor, but that article was actually written by Darren Gannett, who has nothing to do with Florio. So, what are you going to do? Can they please sign Breland with lots of question marks? They can, sure. Will they? That remains to be seen. Watching from the Viking ship in the Twin Cities. Wow, that's a bold call, man. Does it really matter who we play in the preseason? Yes and no, Rick. Sometimes it really depends on what coaches are working on and how much information is shared prior to a game with those staffs. One of the reasons teams like to work with the Packers have worked with Tennessee quite a bit in the preseason. McCarthy has a really good relationship with a lot of the coaches there. That is the same Pittsburgh, etc. we've seen Philadelphia come in to Green Bay a couple times in the last few years. It's the coaching staffs that are familiar with each other and know we're going to work on this, we're going to work on that. We're not going to blitz a lot. We're going to blitz a lot. This is something we need to work on, etc. That happens to a certain extent. It's certainly not every they don't exchange game plans or anything. But hell, they don't write game plans for the preseason. But you do want to work with a team that is trying to accomplish the same things you are. Now you don't get everything you want, but as far as like from the outside watching the games, does it really matter who they play? Not a whole lot. Will Jimmy Graham play more wide receiver or tight end this season in our offense? If you're asking where he's going to line up, I would definitely think much more at a traditional wide receiver position, either on the perimeter or in the slot. I think he will line up at tight end. He'll line up in line on occasion, but I think he'll be much more like Jermichael Finley was when Finley was at his best, either in the slot or outside, out wide. Like I said, I think you will see him in line on occasion, but I think by the end of the year he'll have played way more snaps as a wide receiver than he will have as a tight end. Trade Rodgers to every team in the AFC. Oh, that sounds like fantasy football to me. Have you heard when family night is? I have not yet, John. However, with that first preseason game falling on the window of August 9th through the 13th, you would have to think that I would just take it back a week. Whatever a week is before that, that's the window where family night would traditionally fall. And you can see we've just pinned right there in the comment section. There's Ryan Wood has written up just a little note on the preseason. You can check that out. He'll have a lot of your questions answered there. What's up, Puerto Rico? Thanks for checking in, man. Nice of you to watch. Could the Notre Dame tackle go top 10? I know, what's his name? Gil Brandt threw that out there, I think yesterday or the day before. I think he has a chance. Top 10 seems a little rich for me, considering he has some significant holes in his game, especially against speed. That's something that's going to get him killed in the NFL, or more to the point, his quarterback killed. But, teams are desperate for protection for their quarterbacks, and he's certainly talented, and he can certainly improve. So if they see the potential there, yeah, I guess you can't totally dismiss it. I would be surprised, though. What do you think it would take for to get Patrick Peterson? Too much. Any idea when regular season comes out? Marcus, I have to think it's probably next week. It's usually the week before the draft, leading up to the draft. So I would think probably next Tuesday or Wednesday, most likely Wednesday. Doesn't this draft bode well because so many teams need quarterbacks at the top? Yes, it does, absolutely. Growing the off-season beard, yeah, just lazy, really. Even with Kaiser on board, do we still draft a quarterback? I think so. I think there's a good chance they draft one, maybe even as high as the third round. But I think a lot of it will depend on how the board falls. I don't think they're going to reach for one, but I do think they'll be in the market during draft weekend to either draft one and maybe even trade for one again. So we'll see. I don't think they're done remaking that position. Yes, I saw someone asking the Maurice Jones-Drew mock draft. I actually just put up my mock draft roundup at PackersNews.com. Make sure you check that out. And I included Maurice's mock. I thought it was an interesting thought, jumping up to get Ward. I mean, the Packers have the capital to do it. It really depends on Gutekunst and how he feels about Ward, how strongly he feels about him, his prospects in the NFL. I tell you what. Every evaluator I talk to says he's, without a doubt, the number one corner in this draft. And if the Packers were to make a move to get up to, I think, what do you have him going up to 9 to get him? I mean, that's a significant jump. But like I said, if that's, if Gutekunst has that kind of conviction about him, yeah, go get him. And that would certainly start to. I don't think it'll ever completely allay Packers fans' fears, but that would certainly start to answer a lot of the questions at the cornerback spot. Is it possible to trade down with a team that wants Lamar Jackson? Absolutely. I think that's another possibility. And that's what, why the draft is so great and why we watch, especially the first round. So many possibilities, so many teams scheming and plotting. We're not privy to any of that. And, I know that the great draft dish du jour right now is everyone talking about the Browns possibly taking Josh Allen at number 1, which I think is just, it is the height of lying season. And there is, in my mind, no way in the world the Browns are taking Josh Allen number 1. Now, of course, watch them take Josh Allen number 1, but that's the type of thing where there's just too much time now. The combine's come and gone. Everyone's done their scouting throughout the year. Now they've kind of placed their boards. And so now we've got nothing to do for the next 2 weeks except for, talk about crazy draft scenarios. So that's a long-winded answer to say yes. That's definitely a possibility that the Packers could get a call while they're on the clock and they drop down because someone wants to jump up and get a quarterback. And trade up for a punter. Jonathan, Mike Sherman has left the building. Sorry, guys. Getting text messages here. I like Mike Hughes. I like Mike Hughes a lot. They would have to break their threshold tendency. But I think his game, especially his physicality, he put up a bunch of reps on the bench press, showed off his strength at the combine. If there's a guy you make an exception for, I think he would definitely be one of them. Josh Allen is the best QB in the draft, says Sean. It's a bold claim, sir. Maybe Cleveland agrees with you. New England is in rebuilding mode. Yes and no. They have to figure out what they're going to do post-Brady. There's no doubt about that. If Quentin Nelson is available at 14, sorry I missed the rest of your question, but if you're asking if the Packers take him, I think they have to seriously consider it. He's probably one of the best players in this entire draft. And, guard is sitting there as a need. Now, 14, it's awfully high to take a guard, especially for a team in the Packers who have a really long track record of success finding starters on the third day. But that said, this kid is amazing, and he is possibly one of the cleanest, best prospects to come out, not just at guard, but along the offensive line in quite some time. So if he's sitting there and they think the value is too good to pass up, absolutely it's a possibility. Any good pass rushers available in round 2? Yeah, that's it's a good question. It's always the guys I've been looking at. Like I tweeted out today, I was watching Hercules Mafata. I can't pronounce his name. Now he's a guy I think is going to be available probably round 3 or 4, maybe even 5. I can't see him getting taken in the second round. To me, in this draft, I see a lot of guys who have probably first-round potential. We've talked about them, obviously, in Chubb, Harold Landry. Maybe Davenport sneaks into the first round. I think Arden Key is maybe a second-round prospect. But after that, I think there's a bit of a gulf until you get to that second tier of guys who I don't think they're going to be taken in rounds 2, and maybe even 3. But we'll see. I'm just working off of what I watch on tape and then who I talk to in the league. But I don't really trust much of what I'm being told at this point. I trust scouts and personnel people a lot more during the season when college football is actually being played than I do now, because they know everything that they're saying is getting parsed and regurgitated by the media. So I try to just go by what I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing is that gulf that I'm talking about. Will Arden Key fall to the third round? I think it's a good possibility. I really do. I think the questions in his game coupled with questions off the field, I think there's a really good possibility. I see Beagle being a fixture at outside linebacker. He's got the opportunity, the scheme switch. You got to think there's a bit of a clean slate there across the board when it comes to all those positions, and especially for a team that is desperate for pass rush. If he can show anything in camp in the offseason, he can absolutely stake a claim to that outside spot, which would also help them kind of kick Clay around and maybe move Clay back inside and really use Clay's versatility. Because a big thing that has kept them from being able to, take Clay away from that outside linebacker spot is because they haven't had a viable alternative. I mean, it's hard when you're sitting there in the heat of the battle to say, yeah, let's take Clay and kick him inside and let's have Kyler Fackrell get after the quarterback. I mean, that's just not a viable option. What's more likely, taking a tackle or receiver in round 2? Well, it all depends on their grades on each prospect, but I would lean towards receiver, if only because, like I said, they've had a really impressive track record of finding starting offensive linemen on day 3, coupled with the fact that the last time they took a tackle in round 2, they traded up for one, and it has not looked good. And, of course, that's Jason Spriggs. Let's see. What do you think of taking Lorenzo Carter in rounds 2 or 3? It could work. I mean, I think he'll be there, obviously. It's funny you say rounds 2 or 3. That's a big swing. That's 30 spots. That's a pretty big swing. And I couldn't tell you right now with any kind of convictions whether he's a second round prospect or a third round prospect. Because once you get past that first initial kind of blue chip 15, 20 guys who are actual first round prospects, the talent disparity really narrows, and it really depends on how teams feel and how they have them graded and how they think they're going to fit scheme wise and all the off field stuff and the homework they've done there. And so yeah, it's a possibility. There's no question about it. Clay is always injured. He never plays. Well, he played a lot last year. He missed the Pittsburgh game though. That's true. Does Clay want to play inside? I don't think it really matters what Clay wants. I think playing inside will help him extend his career, help him make more money. If they pitch it to him that way, maybe that works. Is there any way the Packers could move up and grab Chubb? Yeah, they could. I'd be surprised. It would take a decent amount of draft capital, I think, to get up there and get him, because I think they'd have to get up in the top 5 or 6. I mean, yeah, it can be done. They've got the 12 picks, right? They've got more ammo than anybody else in the draft. It's a possibility, but I would be surprised. How do you feel about the kid with one hand in later rounds? We talked about him yesterday. Griffin is I think he's a legit prospect. I know a lot gets made because of his situation with the amputated hand, but he's a player. He played at a high level against high-level competition in college. He produced in college against high-level competition. His testing was off the charts. I think, yeah, absolutely he should get drafted. Now, I know there are going to be a lot of questions about how he's going to operate in the NFL. You got to play with your hands, and he's only got one of them. So we'll see. But I haven't seen anything yet to slow the kid down. So we'll see how NFL evaluators feel about him. Would you be surprised if we cut Cobb and took Ridley in the first to put Ty in the slot? Yes. Martinez taking the defensive calls. I like it. Yeah, he seems very excited about the switch of defensive coordinators. Michael Cohen, if you guys haven't read it, make sure you check PackersNews.com. He talked extensively about being the guy with the communicating headset, making the calls at the line of scrimmage. What was interesting, at least to me, when I talked to Michael about it, Martinez is really kind of relishing the idea of being the man in the middle, making the calls, playing that cat and mouse game with the quarterback across the line of scrimmage, trying to get them into advantageous looks and taking advantage of quarterbacks at the line of scrimmage. So, hey, that's, the Packers could definitely use that. And Martinez seems to be chomping at the bit. Martinez equals A.J. Hawk. I don't know if I agree with that. I think Martinez has shown a little bit more than Hawk did in his first 2 years. I agree that he does have a tendency to be around the ball, making tackles 4 or 5 yards down the line of scrimmage on occasion. But I also think he's made more plays in the backfield than Hawk ever did his first 2 years. I think what would really separate him is if he could just start, making some turnover plays. We've talked about it here a few times. If he just hangs on, he had I think 3 interceptions in his hands last year. If he just hangs on, he changes those games. So if he can just kind of elevate his game in that regard and make some game-changing plays, that will take him above those comparisons. But, purely looking at his game, I understand why the comparison gets made. I think the best receiver in this class is Courtland Sutton. I mean, it really depends on who you talk to. I think he's incredibly talented, and I think he could help the Packers a whole heck of a lot. And I think he should probably be available when they're on the clock in round 2, although you never know. Maybe he goes a little bit before that. You never know. How good can Kenny Clark be? Christopher, that's a great question. I think he can be great. I think he can be Geno Atkins and maybe even more. I think it's funny because like everyone, I put this up there the other day on Twitter where I was, I've been rewatching the season again. It's probably my third time now. And something that really kind of jumps out is the lack of improvement from the younger guys from when we saw them in camp and then early on in the year. And then there's a lot of plateauing, and there are exceptions. You look at Jamal Williams, I think he really came alive. I think Justin McCray really improved. But, I got a lot of pushback, people saying, well, Kenny Clark improved. And I got to say, a lot of the improvement we saw from Kenny Clark, I thought happened in the summer. From that jump from year 1 to year 2. And then I thought, we saw a high level of play, no doubt. But I think there's so much more potential there. And I tend to think that's one reason. I don't think it's the only reason, but I tend to think that's one reason why, Turgovac was let go. I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. Like I said, I think he can be great. I think right now he's a good to very good player, but I think the sky is the limit for the kid. I'll take one or two more here, everybody. Nick Perry, Pro Bowl season this year? If he can stay on the field, yes. We talked about this yesterday. His biggest problem has always been availability. When he is on the field, he is solid to good. He takes advantage of lesser competition at times. He hustles himself into sacks on occasion. He plays the run really well. He's a solid football player. Who, can be an intricate part of, an important part of the Packers defense, but he has to be on the field. And as you guys know, that's been few and far between. Is Adams Justin Harold too? I think it's a little early for that comparison. I know it was a little odd last year seeing him not only a injured scratch early in the year, but then a healthy scratch on the stretch there. But let's give the kid an off season in pads, which he didn't have last year. Let's give him at least the summer and then camp and preseason to kind of maybe round into shape and see what he actually has for a game, rather than just dismissing him after a year of injury. Now, again, we were just talking about Nick Perry. Availability is a big part of it. And he's got to come ready to go and hit the ground running, so to speak. But I think the jury is still very far out on Travius Adams. All right, everybody, I'm going to get going here, but thanks so much for the questions. I'm sorry if I couldn't get to yours. It's always great to see all the interest and participation. Make sure you check PackersNews.com for all the latest. Barring any breaking news overnight, I'll be back tomorrow. Check PackersNews.com. Have a good night, everyone.